Before we dive into tonight's tale, make sure to hit that subscribe button if you want more creepy stories that will keep you up at night. The humid air clung to my skin as I clocked in for my night shift at the Amazon Fulfillment Center. The place loomed against the night sky, a massive, windowless beast humming with the endless churn of conveyor belts and the quiet determination of workers just trying to make it through the night. I'd worked warehouse jobs before, stacking boxes, moving pallets, the usual. But something about this place was different. It wasn't just the isolation, how it sat miles away from anything resembling civilization. It was the way the building felt, like it had been planted here long before the roads and the parking lot, like it had always been here, waiting for us to step inside. Still, the pay was good and steady work was hard to come by. I couldn't afford to be picky. I swiped my badge and stepped inside. The air was thick with the scent of cardboard, machine oil, and that faint, artificial coldness that came from too much recycled air. The overhead fluorescents buzzed faintly, flickering just enough to make me wonder if I was imagining it. At first, everything seemed normal. The usual corporate posters about safety and efficiency were plastered across the walls. Lift with your legs, report spills immediately, productivity's profit. All the stuff you'd expect in a place like this. But then I noticed the other signs. Handwritten notes, tacked up in break rooms, taped above scanners, wedged into lockers. They were written in a rushed, almost frantic scrawl, the ink smudged in places like whoever wrote them had done it in a hurry. I leaned in, reading them carefully. Rule 1, never go to Sector 7 after 3 a.m. Rule 2, if you hear whistling, ignore it. Rule 3, the cameras are watching, follow the rules. Rule 4, don't respond to anyone who doesn't have a badge. Rule 5, if you see a dog, even if it seems friendly, do not approach. At the bottom of each note, written in bold, capital letters, was the same ominous warning: they are always watching. I glanced around, expecting someone else to be as weirded out as I was, but no one seemed to care. Workers walked past without a second glance, their expressions blank with exhaustion. It was like the signs didn't exist. I found my supervisor, a woman named Brenda, leaning against a metal rack near the break room. She looked like she'd been working here since the place was built. Deep lines around her eyes, hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, dark circles beneath her eyes that suggested sleep was a rare luxury. "Hey," I said, jerking my thumb toward the notes. "What's with those?" Brenda barely looked up from her clipboard. "New kid jitters, huh?" She let out a tired sigh. "Look, just focus on your scan rate, okay? Corporate doesn't like slowpokes." "That doesn't really answer my question," I said, feeling a little stupid for pushing it. She finally looked at me then, her expression unreadable. "You want to keep this job?" I hesitated. "Yeah." "Then keep your head down and follow the damn rules." And that was it. Conversation over. I stood there for a second, gripping the strap of my work vest, feeling that quiet unease settle in my gut. I wanted to believe it was just some weird company hazing thing. New hires get spooked, old employees get a laugh. But Brenda's tone didn't sound like she was in on a joke. I shook it off and headed toward my assigned sector. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something about this place was deeply wrong. And worse, I had a sinking suspicion I was about to find out exactly why. Warehouse work has a way of erasing time. Hours stretch and blur together. The repetitive rhythm of scanning, lifting, and loading turning into something automatic. You don't really think, you just move, muscle memory taking over while your brain drifts. The only real markers of time are the ache in your lower back and the growing weight in your eyelids. I was stationed in Sector 4, an unremarkable part of the warehouse filled with towering shelves stacked with household goods and electronics. Air fryers, blenders, smart speakers, things people bought on impulse, not thinking about how many hands had touched them before they arrived on their doorstep. The first night was uneventful. A few dropped packages, a scanner that glitched out for a minute, a guy 2 aisles over swearing at a jammed conveyor belt. It wasn't fun, but it was normal. And normal was fine. Normal meant I could do my job, go home, and pretend I hadn't seen those weird rules taped up around the warehouse. But then the second night came. And at 2 a.m., I heard it. A whistle. It was soft at first, distant, almost swallowed by the constant hum of machinery. I probably wouldn't have noticed it if my brain hadn't already been on edge, but once I did, it was impossible to ignore. A slow, deliberate melody drifting through the aisles. I don't know why, but the moment I registered it, my entire body tensed. My grip on the scanner tightened, and I found myself holding my breath. Whistling isn't scary. It's something people do without thinking. But this didn't sound casual. It wasn't the kind of absent-minded tune someone hums while working. It was controlled, drawn out, measured. I glanced around, expecting to see someone down the aisle, a coworker maybe, killing time, trying to keep themselves entertained. But I didn't see anyone. Just rows and rows of shelves stretching into the distance. I exhaled, shaking it off. It's nothing. Just one of the guys messing around. Still, I reached for my headphones. I had a terrible pop playlist queued up, something upbeat and mindless. I shoved the earbuds in, turned the volume up, and forced myself to focus on scanning. It didn't help. The whistling didn't go away. It slipped through the music, threading itself into the background noise, as if it wasn't coming from any one direction. It was just there, hovering at the edge of my hearing no matter where I moved. I tried to ignore it, tried to focus on the packages in front of me. But then, movement. A quick flicker of something, just beyond the shelves, near the entrance to Sector 7. I froze. My breath hitched, my fingers hovering over the scanner's trigger. My first instinct was to turn, to look straight at whatever had caught my eye. But something deep in my gut told me not to. Instead, I forced myself to keep my head down, my focus locked on the box in my hands. Peripheral vision is unreliable. Shadows shift, lights flicker. It was probably nothing. But the longer I stood there, the stronger the feeling became. That crawling, prickling awareness that someone or something was watching me. And it wasn't the cameras. I kept my head down, pretending like nothing was wrong. Just scan, move, repeat. That's all I had to do. The warehouse was loud, the constant hum of conveyor belts, the occasional beep from a scanner, the distant thud of pallets being stacked. It was easy to get lost in the noise. But something was off. The floor didn't look right. At first, I thought it was just my eyes playing tricks on me, maybe a shadow from the overhead lights shifting as I moved. But the more I looked, the more certain I was that the concrete had changed. Dark patches stained the ground between the shelves. I didn't remember seeing them before. Oil? Maybe. The warehouse wasn't spotless and leaks happened. But these weren't smudges. They were moving. I frowned, taking a cautious step back, my pulse quickening. The stains pulsed. It was subtle, like a slow breath. Expanding, contracting. I swallowed hard. My hand tightened around the scanner. Don't stop working. Don't stop moving. But I couldn't look away. The more I focused, the clearer it became. These weren't stains. They were shapes, small, writhing things stretching across the concrete. At first glance, they looked like nothing more than hairline cracks, jagged lines splintering through the floor. But then I saw them open. Tiny, gaping mouths, slick, wet, moving. I sucked in a sharp breath, my stomach flipping. Some of them had teeth, small, uneven, human-looking teeth. Others were just dark slits, stretching open and shut as if gasping for air. I staggered back, my shoe skidding slightly. No, this isn't real. I squeezed my eyes shut, counted to 3. When I looked again, just cracks, nothing more than cracks in the concrete. But my shoe was wet. The third night was the worst. By now, the job had settled into a routine. Scan, load, repeat. The hours dragged, but I found a rhythm, letting the hum of conveyor belts and distant chatter blend into the background. The exhaustion helped. If I was tired enough, I didn't have to think. Didn't have to remember the way the floor moved or how I sometimes caught glimpses of things just out of sight. But no amount of exhaustion could make me ignore the whistling. It started earlier this time, midnight. It wasn't a distant sound drifting from some forgotten part of the warehouse. It was close, sharp, deliberate, like it wanted me to hear. I kept my head down, my fingers tightening around the scanner. The barcode blurred as my focus wavered, my ears straining to pinpoint the source. Ignore it. That was the rule. I turned up the volume on my headset, the tinny pop song barely enough to mask the growing unease crawling up my spine. But the whistling cut through the noise like a blade, weaving its way into my brain, setting my teeth on edge. I forced myself to keep scanning, to focus on the packages in front of me. The numbers, the weight, the routine. That's when I saw it. A shadow at the edge of my vision. I told myself not to look. But my body had other plans. My head turned before I could stop it. At the far end of the aisle, barely visible between the shelves, a figure. It stood still, just outside the glow of the overhead lights, lingering at the very edge of where the darkness began, tall, thin, watching. I stopped breathing, my body locked up, instinct screaming at me to move, but I couldn't. The figure didn't shift, didn't tilt its head, didn't take a step forward. It just stood there. I forced air into my lungs, slow and shaky, my fingers gripping the radio clipped to my vest. I pressed the button. "Brenda, I need security in Sector 4, now." Silence. A static pop. Then, nothing. My chest tightened. I glanced around, expecting to see another worker somewhere nearby, but the entire aisle was empty. I was alone. I looked back at the figure. It had moved. Not a lot, just a single step closer. A fraction of movement, barely noticeable, but enough to spike my pulse into my throat. I swallowed hard, pressing the radio button again, this time with more force, as if that would make a difference. "Brenda, do you copy?" Static. I licked my lips, shifting my weight from foot to foot, fighting the overwhelming urge to say something. But then, I saw it. It had no badge. A bolt of ice shot through me. Don't respond to anyone who doesn't have a badge. My hand dropped from the radio. My breathing hitched. Turn around. Walk away. I took a slow, measured step back. The figure didn't move. Another step. Nothing. I turned, and I ran. The shelves blurred past as I weaved through the aisles, my boots slamming against the concrete. The whistling followed me, slipping between the rows, twisting through the air like it was coming from everywhere at once. I wasn't thinking about where I was going. I just ran. And then, I saw the sign. My stomach dropped. The rule. Never go to Sector 7 after 3 a.m., but I had no choice. The whistling was right behind me now. I bolted through the threshold, barely registering the sudden shift in atmosphere. And then, silence. It was like stepping into a vacuum. No more whistling, no more hum of conveyor belts, no distant voices or mechanical clicks of scanners, just stillness. The temperature plunged. The air was thick, heavy in my lungs, colder than anything I'd ever felt inside the warehouse. I exhaled, watching my breath curl into the air in front of me. Something wasn't right. I slowed, my heartbeat slamming against my ribs, my boots making no sound against the floor. Then, a low growl, my muscles seized. It came from ahead of me, deep and guttural, vibrating through the floor. I turned the corner and stopped dead. A dog. At least I thought it was a dog. It stood in the middle of the aisle, completely still, watching me with dull red eyes. Not glowing, not burning, just wrong. It was too thin, its ribs pressing against the patchy matted fur. Its mouth was slightly open, revealing teeth, more than it should have. Rows of them. The rule. If you see a dog, even if it seems friendly, do not approach. It wasn't friendly. I took a step back. The dog took a step forward. Its lips curled, not into a snarl, but something worse, like it was trying to smile. A sound crawled up its throat, something between a growl and a laugh. I reached blindly for anything nearby, my hand closing around a box. Without thinking, I hurled it. The impact was solid, the box colliding with the dog's chest in a burst of cardboard and plastic. The dog let out a sound, not a bark, not a whimper, a high-pitched, broken yelp, like something pretending to be hurt. And then, it disappeared. Not ran away, not skittered off, vanished, like it had never been there. The silence crept back in. My chest rose and fell, my breath coming in ragged gasps. My body screamed at me to move, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. Then, something shifted behind me, a shadow stretching, unfolding. I didn't think. I ran. I didn't care which direction. I just ran, the frozen air stinging my skin, my lungs burning. The warehouse stretched out in an endless maze, but I didn't stop, didn't look back. I reached a door, one I didn't recognize. No time to think, no time to question. I grabbed the handle and pulled, and stepped into somewhere else. At least, that's what it felt like. The air was wrong, thicker, almost buzzing against my skin, like stepping through an invisible barrier. The fluorescent lights above flickered wildly, and for a split second, the layout of the warehouse seemed off. The rows of shelves looked taller. The aisles stretched longer than they should have. The shadows clung to the walls, too dark for the dim industrial lighting. Then, the moment passed. The light steadied. The warehouse snapped back into place, and I was just standing in an empty aisle. No dog, no figure, no sound at all, except the hum of conveyor belts in the distance. My hands were shaking. I needed to get out of here. I turned on my heel and ran, blindly, recklessly, until the familiar sight of the break room door came into view. I didn't stop running until I reached the break room. The second I burst through the door, the world shifted back to normal. The hum of vending machines, the low drone of the overhead lights, the faint scent of stale coffee and microwaved leftovers. Brenda was there, sitting at the small round table near the window, stirring a cup of coffee with a slow, steady hand. Unbothered, she barely looked up when I stumbled in, breathless, my heart still hammering in my chest. "What's all the commotion?" I stared at her. How was she this calm? I forced air into my lungs, swallowing back the panic clawing up my throat. "Sector 7, I gasped. "The dog, the figure." Brenda sighed, setting her spoon down with a soft clink. She finally looked at me, her expression unreadable. "You saw them, huh?" Something in her tone made my skin prickle. Not surprised, not confused, just resigned. She knew. She'd always known. I gripped the edge of the counter, my knuckles white. "You knew?" My voice was a raw whisper, barely holding itself together. Brenda took a slow sip of coffee. "Look, kid, this place has history." I waited, my pulse thudding in my ears. She set her cup down. "Before it was a warehouse, it was a chemical plant. Bad things happened. Accidents, deaths, maybe worse." The words settled into my brain like cold, heavy stones. That wasn't in the orientation. I swallowed hard. "And the rules?" Brenda exhaled through her nose, rubbing her temple like this conversation was exhausting her. Like I was the problem here. "They keep things balanced." I didn't like the way she said that. "Balanced?" I repeated. The word felt wrong in my mouth. She finally met my eyes. Her gaze was steady, serious. "Follow them," she said, "and you don't end up like the others." The air in the break room felt heavier now, like I'd stepped into something I wasn't supposed to. I should have asked who the others were, but deep down, I already knew. I quit that morning. I didn't wait for my shift to end. I didn't bother explaining. I just walked straight to the supervisor's office, handed in my badge, and left. Brenda didn't try to stop me. She didn't say a word. Just looked at me with the same tired expression, like she had seen this exact scene play out 100 times before. Stepping outside felt like waking up from a fever dream. The first thing I noticed was the sun, bright, warm, completely indifferent to what had just happened inside. The warehouse stood behind me, a massive humming monolith, oblivious to the fact that it had nearly swallowed me whole. I got in my car and just sat there, hands gripping the wheel, breathing, trying to feel normal again. But something had changed. For weeks after, I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't truly escaped, that whatever lurked in the shadows of that place still had its eyes on me. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I had gotten spooked by exhaustion and the eerie environment, that the rules were just some kind of sick joke played by veteran workers on the new hires. But deep down, I knew better. The smell was the first thing that convinced me. That sharp, metallic tang, blood and ozone, would creep into my apartment late at night, just faint enough to make me second-guess myself, just strong enough to make my stomach turn. Then came the whistling. At first it was distant, barely more than a whisper carried by the wind. I'd be lying in bed half asleep when I'd hear it, low, slow, familiar. It never lasted long, just a few notes before fading into silence. But I knew what I heard. I started keeping my windows shut, my curtains drawn. Every night I double-checked my locks. I left the lights on. It didn't matter. The whistling always came back. Then one night I woke up to something worse. I wasn't sure what had woken me at first. But as I sat up, rubbing the sleep from my eyes, I realized the air was wrong, thicker, heavy, the same way it had felt in the warehouse right before things went bad. I swung my legs over the bed, heart pounding, and reached for my phone. But before I could grab it, my floor moved. Not a lot, just the smallest shift beneath my feet, like something was stirring underneath. A cold sweat broke out across my back. Slowly, I reached down and pressed my palm against the hardwood. It felt solid, normal, a breath, not mine. A soft, slow exhale from beneath the floorboards. I yanked my hand back and scrambled onto my bed, heart slamming against my ribs. I stayed there, staring at the floor, waiting. Nothing else happened. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I started looking for a new place to live. It was a few weeks later that I saw the news. I wasn't looking for it. I had finally started putting distance between myself and that job. trying to forget. But then, while scrolling through a local news site, a headline caught my eye. Minor fire at Amazon warehouse, no injuries reported. My stomach twisted as I clicked the article. It was short, too short. The official statement blamed a small electrical fire, no significant damage, no employees harmed. But buried at the very bottom of the page was a single sentence that sent ice water through my veins. Authorities are investigating reports of unusual animal activity within the facility. I stared at the screen, my breath coming in shallow gulps. The dog. I hadn't imagined it. None of it had been in my head. They were still there, still watching, and still waiting for someone to break the rules. I moved out of my apartment a week later, packed up, left town, never looked back. But every now and then, on cold nights, when the wind is just right, I smell it. That sharp, metallic scent. Like blood and ozone. And I know, somewhere in the darkness they're still there, guarding their territory, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to step inside. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more creepy stories. Stay safe, and see you in the next nightmare.